So what is figured bass? With this video I give a short and comprehensible introduction to this subject. If you're a second-tier patron, you will have access to the PDF version of the score with additional explanations and a suggestive Roman numeral analysis.
Yay!
Moreover, you will also gain access to an extra PDF on another more famous and more complex Bach aria, namely the Erbarme dich, mein Gott from the Matthew Passion. This will be an excerpt and not the full score. I'll include this as an additional exercise because the score contains a more complex figured bass than this example. The figures and symbols, often accidentals, indicate intervals. These are chord as well as non-chord tones that the musician as accompanist could play together with the bass line. This method was mainly used during the Baroque period, but also later, although more rarely. The numbers indicate the number of scale steps above the bass line. At first glance, a figured bass can have a confusing impression, because some symbols are not as straightforward and have different meanings compared to Roman numeral symbols, also depending on their context. Another confusing thing about them is their different meaning and layout depending on which country and time era the music was written in. However, there are a lot of similarities, and here are some of the most common realizations, focusing on late Baroque music. This figure means you have to play the chord in root position. An interval of a fifth and a third above the root gives you the chord in root position. Actually, this type of figured bass is so common that it is mostly omitted, except for a passing tone. If you look at the score, you'll see there is no indication on the first strong beat, even though we're pretty sure it's an A minor chord in root position. If a composer wants the musician to play the bass line only, they could write TS, meaning tasto solo. If only a third is written, this usually means the same as a 5-3 or no figure. The same goes if you spot a 5 only. In the first bar we already see an example of this common figure, which implies a first inversion of the A minor chord. A sixth above C gives you an A, so an A minor chord in first inversion. This also parallels the Roman numeral analysis notation, in which the first inversion chords are indicated with a superscript 6, for example the tonic in first inversion. The symbol 6 thus also implies a third, because a third above C we have E, and this is also part of the A minor triad. However, this third is not notated. In Roman numerals it is omitted as well. Exception. In some rare cases the 6 can also mean a 6-4, but it's much less common. Notice that the continue player doesn't necessarily have to strike a chord on each figure indication. This would sound dull and very robotic. Ornamentations, arpeggios and other improvisations are thus very common in this style. However, the continue player has a supporting role and thus should not claim too much attention. For the 6-4 figure we can reason in the same way. In the last bar we have a 6-4 figure moving to a fifth and a sharp symbol. In the violin part we see a clear cadence figure, with the 6th C moving to the 5th B. The 4th A is moving to the 3rd G sharp, creating the dominant which resolves to the tonic in the next bar. In this context we thus have a second inversion cadential dominant chord implied. Note that the 6-4 does not imply a cadential chord necessarily. It can also be used as a second inversion on a weak beat, for example. Before we go over the implied 7 chords, I want to discuss accidentals. When a sharp, natural or a flat is indicated, it means you have to play an alteration by a semitone, and not necessarily an actual sharp or a flat. Accidentals can be used independent, usually indicating the alteration has to be applied to the third, also implying a perfect fifth. The same is true for the flat. The natural also applies to the third. In the Bach example, we can see a sharp on the first strong beat of bar 2. In the violin, we have a fifth B above E, so the sharp indicates that G sharp has to be played to complete the E dominant chord triad. But there's more. You can use accidentals coupled with numbers indicated on which interval they apply. This method is present in Roman numerals as well. Let's start with the sharp sixth. This means you have to raise the sixth with one semitone. But there is another way of notating this, using these two symbols, a forward and a backward slash. An example can be found on the score here, where Bach uses the second version of the E dominant triad with a raised sixth G sharp and a perfect fourth B. If you see a forward slash on a fifth, it indicates a diminished fifth. A raised fifth is indicated by a sharp or a plus sign added to it. Quite confusing, right? We just learned that the forward slash has two different meanings depending to which number it is coupled. So always be careful and look critically at such passages. Sharps and pluses can also be used on bass figures with the numbers 2 and 4. The number 4 can have a forward slash as well, but more on that in 7 chords now. As I said, bass figures don't always imply chords, but 7 chords are often implied using them, so here are their most common realizations. A seventh indicates a seventh to be played, usually accompanied with a fifth and a third of the chord, thus a 7th chord in root position. In the example we can find one here. The bass leaps a fourth from G natural to C, and we can harmonize this as a G dominant 7th chord with F, which is present in the violin here, moving to a C major triad here. Notice the absence of a G sharp in this brief inflection. 7 chords or passing tones can also be implied using 6-5, usually meaning 6-5-3, giving us an implied first inversion 7th chord. This is also the same for Roman numerals. Their second inversion is given by the symbol 4-3, implying 6-4-3. The third inversion is given by 4-2 or a 2 alone, indicating 6-4-2. This is not the whole repertoire of figures for 7th chords. Usually 7, 2 and 4 can be combined and used in more complex combinations depending on the layout of the counterpoint and voice leading. An 8 is often used as part of suspension, but can also be used as an open octave above the bass. The 9th indicates 9-5-3 or 9-7-5-3. Mostly the 9th in Baroque context is a dissonance that is being resolved to the octave 8. There is also the flat 9th indicating a flat 9-5-3 realization, or with a flat 7th, flat 9, flat 7, 5-3. Lastly, when a bass note changes but the notes above it are to be held, a line is drawn next to the figures, for as long as the chord is to be held. An example can be found in the Erbarme dich aria at the end of bar 4. The home key here is B minor, and the dominant is F sharp. Bach indicates a raised third, A sharp. The leading tone is to be held above the bass figure F sharp, C sharp and E. The dominant harmony is prolonged because he then indicates a sixth, raised fourth and a 2. So let's see, a 2 above E is F sharp, a raised fourth thus indicates A sharp, and the sixth is C sharp. And indeed, these notes of the F sharp dominant 7th chord are all present in the other instruments as well. In the description below I will give a link to a very good PDF summary written by Dr. Alice Baldwin. It contains an overview of the most common basso continuo figures discussed here and some additional information. Knowing all this, you could now challenge yourself and try analyzing this Bach aria. Per illustration I've made a PDF with a supporting Roman numeral analysis, but there's more in it. The structure of themes, motivic connections, cadences, use of sequences, ornamentations, modulations, and text use will all be provided on this PDF. If you're a second-tier patron, you will have access to the score and a supplementary figured bass exercise and analysis on an excerpt from the beautiful Erbarme dich aria, also with additional Roman numerals. Good luck practicing and see you on Patreon.